Have you ever wondered how humans survived in some of the harshest climates on Earth without the comfort of modern technology or medicine? Imagine living in a land where winters stretch for months, where frost can bite through layers of wool, and where food is scarce, yet life demands endurance, ingenuity, and constant vigilance. This was the world of the Vikings, farmers, raiders, traders, and explorers who carved their existence from the unforgiving soils of Scandinavia. To survive, they developed a profound understanding of the land, the seasons, and the rhythms of life and death around them. Their story is not one of mere survival. It is a testament to human resilience and adaptation, a narrative written in frost and fire. In the first light of dawn, Viking villages stirred quietly under low gray skies. Smoke coiled from thatched roofs, curling upward and disappearing into the chill morning air. The sound of livestock, sheep, goats, pigs, added a soft murmur to the awakening, and somewhere in the distance, the creak of a wooden water wheel turned by icy streams echoed across the valley. Every household had a rhythm, a routine honed by necessity. The Vikings understood that the unforgiving climate left no room for waste or delay. Each day demanded labor, preparation, and ingenuity. Their survival depended on their ability to harness what the land offered and to anticipate what it could withhold. Food was central to life, not just for sustenance but for survival itself. The Vikings' diets were a patchwork of farming, hunting, and foraging. Barley, rye, and oats dominated the fields, grown in terraces and cleared plots painstakingly maintained against winter storms. These grains provided bread and porridge, fundamental sources of carbohydrates in a world where meat could be fleeting. Foraging supplemented their meals. Wild berries, roots, and herbs collected from forests provided flavor, nutrition, and sometimes medicine. But it was the mastery of preservation that allowed Vikings to endure the long winters. Fish were hung on racks in the biting wind to dry, salted in barrels, or smoked over slow fires, turning perishable resources into long-lasting protein. Meat was stored in cool cellars or buried in peat to slow spoilage, while fermentation, a practice applied to dairy, grains, and even fish, created foods that could survive months without refrigeration. Vikings understood instinctively that survival was not only about catching or growing food, but making it endure. Yet food alone was not enough. Shelter was equally critical. Viking homes or longhouses were marvels of practicality and adaptation. Built from timber, turf, and stone, they were designed to withstand storms and insulate against winter's relentless cold. Thick walls of wattle and daub, sometimes reinforced with layers of sod, kept warmth trapped inside. Central hearths provided heat for cooking and warmth for the family, with smoke venting through roof holes or chimneys, a delicate balance of warmth and ventilation that reduced the risk of suffocation while keeping fires burning. Beds were simple but functional, raised wooden platforms lined with straw, furs, and hides to trap body heat. Vikings understood the concept of layering before modern science gave it a name. Multiple layers of wool, linen, and animal skins created insulation that allowed humans to survive where exposed flesh could succumb to frostbite in hours. In these homes, the family gathered not just for warmth but for survival, sharing both labor and knowledge as they prepared for the months ahead. Health was a constant concern. Life expectancy was far shorter than today, and illness could sweep through villages with deadly efficiency. Yet the Vikings were far from helpless. They employed practical remedies drawn from their intimate knowledge of the natural world. Willow bark, rich in salicin, acted as an analgesic. Herbs like juniper and yarrow were used for antiseptic purposes, while poultices of clay or crushed plants treated wounds. Midwives were crucial figures, guiding women through childbirth, while knowledge of bones, sprains, and infections was passed orally through generations. Hygiene, though primitive by modern standards, was meticulous where possible. Communal baths and saunas, often near rivers or lakes, were used to cleanse the body, while careful storage of food and water reduced the spread of disease. The Vikings' approach to health was holistic. They understood the interconnectedness of diet, hygiene, shelter, and physical activity long before modern science codified it. Children, too, were taught these survival skills from an early age. By the age of 6 or 7, they were learning to handle tools, care for animals, and understand the cycles of planting and harvest. Adolescents accompanied adults on hunting trips, absorbing knowledge about the forests, rivers, and coastline. Learning was not formalized in schools, but in the rhythm of daily life. Knowledge was practical, passed down through stories, observation, and hands-on experience. This transmission of skill and awareness was vital because in a land where the weather could turn deadly in a matter of hours, ignorance was fatal. Even beyond the home, Vikings had to contend with the elements on a grand scale. Winters were brutal and long, lasting up to 7 months in northern territories. Snow could reach the rooftops, and rivers froze solid, cutting off transportation routes. In these conditions, preparation was everything. Crops were stored, livestock sheltered, and wood piles built with precision to ensure that families would have fuel for warmth and cooking. The Vikings' knowledge of geography was equally vital. They understood which valleys collected frost first, where winds funneled most fiercely, and which coastal inlets offered the best access to resources. Seasonal migration was not uncommon. Communities sometimes shifted between permanent homes and winter lodges to maximize shelter, forage, and access to water. Adaptation was constant, and the line between success and tragedy was thin. Communities themselves were built around cooperation. Vikings were not solitary survivors. Their villages were networks of interdependence. Neighbors shared labor, tools, and knowledge. The construction of longhouses, the repair of dikes, the storage of grain, all required collective effort. Trade with nearby villages or distant communities brought items not available locally: iron for tools, salt for preservation, or rare spices and cloth. In this, the Vikings' survival was both physical and social. The climate demanded collaboration as much as courage. The sense of community was as much a defense against the cold as the walls of their homes, as essential as the stores of food in their cellars. But life was never static, and survival required constant innovation. The Vikings developed specialized techniques to exploit every available resource. Ice fishing with handmade hooks, hunting with bows and spears, and even cultivating root vegetables under the snow using early methods of cold storage, all reflect a society attuned to its environment. Winter pastures were carefully managed to keep livestock alive when grass was buried under snow, and supplementary feed made from stored grains ensured that animals provided milk, meat, and labor even in lean months. Their diet, therefore, was not merely a reflection of necessity. It was a product of careful planning, foresight, and a deep understanding of natural cycles. Perhaps most striking of all was their resilience in the face of uncertainty. Storms could wipe out a crop overnight. Disease could decimate a family or a village. Yet the Vikings endured, not through brute strength alone, but through observation, ingenuity, and an intimate relationship with their environment. They learned to read the sky, the sea, and the land, to predict the coming of frost, rain, or famine, and to respond before disaster struck. Their survival was a daily act of intelligence and courage, repeated countless times, generation after generation. To understand the Vikings is to understand survival in its purest, most elemental form. It is to witness humans stripped to the essentials of food, shelter, and health, yet finding in these basics the means to live, thrive, and even explore beyond their immediate world. Their story is a meditation on human adaptability, a chronicle of ingenuity tested by relentless cold and scarce resources. In the centuries that followed, tales of Viking raids, exploration, and settlement captured imagination. Yet beneath the legends lies a story far more profound, the story of ordinary people confronting extraordinary challenges, armed with little more than knowledge, skill, and determination. As we journey further into this world, we will uncover how Vikings not only survived the winters, but turned them into opportunities, how the landscape shaped their society, and how the intricate dance of nature and human ingenuity allowed communities to endure in a climate that would have defeated the unprepared. The frost was real, the hunger was real, and yet life persisted. The question remains, what can we learn from a people who faced death so directly and turned survival into art? Survival in Scandinavia was not a matter of luck. It was a careful orchestration of timing, labor, and community. The Vikings' approach to winter was as methodical as it was ingenious. As autumn waned, villages transformed into hubs of preparation, with families working tirelessly to secure the stores that would carry them through the months when frost and snow rendered the fields barren. Grain harvests were collected, dried, and stored in wooden bins or stone cellars, protected from moisture and rodents. Livestock were corralled and fed with hay harvested in summer, while the strongest animals were kept alive to ensure milk and meat for the harsh months ahead. These measures were not merely precautionary, they were lifelines, the difference between thriving and perishing. Winter was a test of both endurance and skill. The longhouse, the heart of the Viking home, became a center of activity and strategy. Inside, the hearth burned steadily, the flames a source of warmth and light, while the family prepared meals that would provide sustenance and energy for the work yet to come. Food was more than nutrition. It was medicine against the cold, and each meal carefully balanced protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Fish dried over open fires had a smoky flavor and could last months, while salted meats and preserved dairy offered vital calories when hunting and foraging became impossible. Bread baked from stored grains was often coarse and dense, but it carried the necessary sustenance, and porridge, thick, warm, and filling, was a staple that could be enriched with dried berries, herbs, or milk. Every bite mattered, and the Vikings understood that waste was a luxury they could not afford. The landscape itself was both a threat and a resource. Rivers froze, forests were blanketed in snow, and coastal waters could be choked with ice. But the Vikings learned to read these signs of nature, to adapt their movements, and to exploit the environment in ways that few others could. Ice fishing became a winter mainstay. Holes cut into frozen lakes allowed access to fish, which were then smoked or stored in cold cellars. Hunting strategies shifted, tracking footprints in snow, setting snares, and understanding animal behaviors allowed families to supplement their diets when farming was impossible. Even the smallest details, such as knowing which slopes would shelter animals from wind or which valleys would retain warmth, were critical knowledge passed down through generations. Survival required constant observation, a dialogue with nature that could not be learned in a single lifetime. Communities were crucial to weathering winter's grip. Vikings relied on one another not only for labor, but for protection against isolation and scarcity. Longhouses often housed extended families, and villages shared tasks such as repairing roofs, splitting wood, or tending communal granaries. Trade between communities allowed access to resources not locally available, whether iron tools, salt, or exotic foods, and the exchange of knowledge was just as important. Villagers taught each other techniques for preserving food, managing livestock, or navigating icy waters. In these networks, survival was collective. No individual could withstand the full force of winter alone. The Viking ethos of cooperation extended beyond kinship, embracing the practical necessity of community cohesion. Yet survival was not merely about weathering the cold. It was about maintaining mobility and readiness. Even in winter, the Vikings were warriors and traders. Ships were winterized, oars repaired, and supplies stored, allowing them to strike unexpectedly, explore distant coasts, or bring back goods from abroad. Portaging sleds over frozen rivers became a vital skill, and snowshoes or skis allowed hunters to traverse snowbound landscapes efficiently. Knowledge of topography and seasonal changes was crucial. Understanding when a river would freeze solid enough to support transport or when a storm might strand a party in the wilderness could mean life or death. These skills were honed from childhood, creating generations of humans intimately attuned to the rhythms of their harsh environment. Health challenges intensified during the winter. Frostbite, respiratory illnesses, and malnutrition were constant threats. Yet the Vikings were resourceful in mitigating these risks. Warmth was prioritized, not only in homes, but in clothing. Multiple layers of wool, fur, and linen created insulation, and garments were carefully maintained and repaired to avoid exposure. Diets, although limited, were strategically planned. Preserved meats, fermented dairy, and high-calorie grains combated energy loss in extreme cold. Medicinal knowledge, though rudimentary by modern standards, was extensive. Herbs, poultices, and natural remedies were applied to wounds, respiratory problems, and fevers. Community care ensured that the sick were monitored, fed, and treated, reflecting a culture in which survival depended on collective effort and shared knowledge. Beyond the practical, there was a profound mental resilience among the Vikings. They embraced winter not as a passive burden, but as a challenge to be mastered. Storytelling, songs, and rituals reinforced community bonds and provided psychological sustenance. Fireside tales of ancestors surviving famine, storms, or raids were more than entertainment. They were blueprints for endurance, teaching lessons of vigilance, resourcefulness, and courage. Rituals marking the turning of the seasons, celebrations of harvest, and ceremonies for the dead all reinforced the sense that humans were part of a larger cycle, a rhythm in which preparation, labor, and respect for the environment were inseparable. Innovation played a continuous role. Simple technologies allowed the Vikings to extend their capabilities. Iron tools, meticulously forged and maintained, made plowing, woodcutting, and construction feasible even in frozen soils. Salted or smoked food extended the availability of protein, while barrels and clay pots allowed grains and liquids to survive storage. Even fermentation, a process of controlled decay, was applied to create nutrients that could endure through months of scarcity. Every aspect of Viking life reflected a practical understanding of chemistry, physics, and biology, distilled into everyday survival strategies. The wisdom accumulated over generations turned hardship into a manageable, if relentless, system. The Viking relationship with livestock exemplified this balance of practicality and foresight. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs were not simply sources of meat. They provided milk, cheese, hides, and labor. Animals were sheltered from wind and snow, fed from stored hay, and selected for hardiness. Certain breeds were favored for their ability to withstand cold or produce milk in lean conditions. Careful observation ensured that the weakest were culled before winter, protecting the larger herd and conserving limited resources. Every decision regarding animals was a calculation of risk, benefit, and survival, a constant negotiation with nature's unpredictability. Even during the harshest winters, Vikings maintained access to water and fuel. Wells and springs were dug carefully to prevent freezing, while ice and snow were sometimes used as supplemental water sources. Wood was stacked meticulously, kept dry, and rationed to ensure that fires could burn continuously without exhausting supplies. Windbreaks, insulation, and roof maintenance were essential. A single structural failure during a storm could leave a family exposed to deadly cold. These precautions required labor, planning, and knowledge passed orally through generations, a living curriculum of survival. Yet, the Vikings were not simply reactive. They were proactive, turning adversity into opportunity. The harsh climate forced them to innovate in travel, navigation, and trade. Winter provided frozen rivers for easier overland transport, ice roads connecting regions that were otherwise inaccessible. Snow and ice enabled sleds to carry heavier loads than summer paths could bear. Coastal and river navigation was timed to avoid storms and ice hazards. Knowledge of tides, wind, and celestial markers guided their journeys. In this, the Vikings' survival strategies extended beyond subsistence. They were explorers, traders, and warriors who had adapted not only to endure winter, but to exploit it strategically. By the time spring arrived, the landscape bore the marks of endurance and preparation. Stored food had carried families through months of scarcity. Livestock had survived and, in some cases, thrived despite the cold. Skills honed during the winter, tracking, hunting, navigation, carpentry, and medicine, ensured that communities could recover quickly and resume farming, fishing, and trade. The cycles of labor, risk, and reward were tightly interwoven, a testament to human ingenuity in extreme conditions. Vikings did not merely survive. They thrived within the constraints of their environment, turning knowledge into a weapon against mortality itself. Through the lens of winter, one sees the Vikings not as mythical warriors alone, but as masterful managers of risk, resource, and community. Their survival required foresight, skill, and relentless attention to detail. Food, shelter, health, and community were all interconnected, forming a web of strategies that allowed humans to endure where others might fail. In understanding how Vikings navigated the brutal climate, we glimpse not just the story of a people, but a broader lesson about adaptation, resilience, and the human capacity to turn even the harshest challenges into opportunity. The question remains, how did these strategies evolve over time, influencing not only survival, but expansion, trade, and conquest? How did the lessons learned in frost and wind shape the Vikings' journeys beyond their homelands, across oceans, and into distant lands? The winter was more than a season, it was a teacher, and those who survived it became architects of their destiny. Spring arrived slowly, as ice retreated from rivers and snow thawed from the valleys, revealing the land that had been hidden beneath winter's harsh grip. For the Vikings, this seasonal transition was a moment of renewal and preparation. Fields once blanketed in frost were now ready to be plowed, and animals that had endured the long months of confinement returned to pastures, grazing on the tender shoots that emerged from the thawed earth. Life surged forward, but it was never unchecked. Every action, every decision bore the memory of winter's trials, a quiet acknowledgement that survival required constant attention to the cycles of nature. The skills honed during frost and storm were now applied to a broader canvas, shaping agriculture, trade, exploration, and warfare. Farming in the warmer months demanded careful management. Grain fields were sowed with barley, rye, and oats, crops that could withstand both frost and drought, ensuring reliable yields in an unpredictable climate. Fields were rotated, and small plots of vegetables, cabbage, turnips, and onions were cultivated to supplement diets. The Vikings understood the concept of soil fertility intuitively, using animal manure to enrich the land and prevent depletion. This balance between agriculture and livestock was critical. Animals provided manure, milk, and labor, while crops ensured the family had stable nourishment. Food security was never assumed. It was created through observation, effort, and adaptation. Fishing and hunting remained integral, even as farming expanded. Coastal villages thrived on the abundance of the sea. Nets were cast from small boats, capturing herring, cod, and other fish that could be dried, smoked, or salted. Rivers and lakes teemed with trout and salmon, providing protein-rich meals that could be preserved for winter. Hunting complemented this diet, with deer, elk, and small game supplementing vegetables and grains. Knowledge of animal behavior, seasonal migration, and feeding patterns allowed Vikings to maximize returns with minimal risk. The balance of work and understanding ensured that the bounty of the land and water was harvested without depletion, an early practice of sustainable resource management born of necessity. The warmer seasons also opened the doors to trade and exploration. Rivers and fjords, freed from ice, became highways for Viking ships. Longships, sleek and fast, carried goods, warriors, and knowledge across vast distances. These vessels were technological marvels, designed to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. Their construction reflected an intimate understanding of wood, rope, and sail, honed over generations. Communities invested months in building and maintaining these ships, recognizing that mobility was as vital as shelter or food. These journeys were more than commerce. They were extensions of survival. Trade brought salt, iron, cloth, and luxury goods, while exploration offered new lands to settle or raid. Each voyage relied on lessons learned in the cold. Knowledge of navigation, weather, and resource management became weapons of strategy and survival. Social cohesion, established during the harsh months of winter, manifested in organized communal labor. Villagers gathered to repair longhouses, rebuild fences, and fortify granaries. Shared work extended beyond immediate survival to encompass protection and expansion. Fortifications were maintained to safeguard against raiders, while communal granaries ensured that no single family would face famine alone. Festivals and feasts celebrated both the harvest and the bonds of community, reinforcing social structures that were crucial for survival. These gatherings were more than ceremonial. They were practical mechanisms for ensuring cooperation, knowledge transfer, and the distribution of labor and resources. The Vikings' approach to health evolved with the seasons. The return of greenery brought new sources of nutrition and medicine. Wild herbs, berries, and roots offered vitamins and minerals that complemented preserved winter stores. Wounds and illnesses could be treated with fresh ingredients, while midwives and healers continued to rely on traditional remedies refined through generations. Exercise and mobility increased as men, women, and children worked in fields, traveled along rivers, or hunted in forests, maintaining strength and resilience. Health, like survival itself, was a continuous practice, an interplay of diet, activity, hygiene, and community support, honed through experience and necessity. Education remained practical, embedded in daily life. Children learned by observation and participation, tending animals, sowing crops, navigating waterways, and handling tools. Adolescents accompanied adults on trade voyages or hunting trips, absorbing skills critical for both survival and success in society. Storytelling and oral history reinforced these lessons, embedding practical knowledge in narrative form. Tales of ancestors, heroic deeds, and cautionary events were more than entertainment. They were instruction manuals for life, guiding behavior, shaping risk assessment, and fostering resilience. Through this continuous cycle of learning, Vikings ensured that no generation entered adulthood unprepared. Craftsmanship was another pillar of Viking life, reflecting both necessity and ingenuity. Tools, weapons, and household items were produced with precision and care. Blacksmiths forged iron into plows, axes, and swords, while woodworkers shaped boats, furniture, and domestic implements. Every item was made to endure, to perform under stress, and to serve multiple purposes where possible. Craftsmanship was a form of foresight, reducing dependence on uncertain trade and providing the means to manipulate the environment for survival. These skills were highly valued, and mastery of them reinforced social status and economic power within the village and beyond. The Viking worldview intertwined survival with exploration. Their intimate knowledge of climate, terrain, and sea currents enabled voyages across oceans to lands as distant as Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Each expedition required meticulous planning. Provisions had to last, crews had to be trained, and ships had to withstand storms. The same attention to resource management that preserved life during winter applied to these journeys, turning survival skills into tools for expansion. Exploration was a natural extension of the practical intelligence honed in the longhouses and fields, a demonstration of adaptability and courage. Even warfare was informed by survival strategy. Raiding parties relied on mobility, planning, and resource acquisition. Seasonal knowledge dictated the timing of attacks. When rivers were navigable, crops were ripe, and adversaries might be least prepared. Weapons were maintained meticulously. Armor, shields, and swords were repaired before every campaign. The physical conditioning gained through daily labor, hunting, and farming ensured readiness for combat. In this way, survival and warfare were intertwined. Strength, strategy, and resilience were cultivated in the fields and forests as much as on the battlefield. As the cycle of seasons continued, the Vikings demonstrated an extraordinary ability to balance immediate needs with long-term planning. Grain and livestock, labor and leisure, health and defense, each aspect of life was part of an interconnected system. Adaptation was constant, requiring observation, innovation, and coordination. They did not merely react to challenges. They anticipated them, turning knowledge into a shield against uncertainty. Their existence was a delicate equilibrium, maintained through skill, discipline, and a deep understanding of nature's rhythms. By the time winter approached again, the Vikings were ready. Stored provisions were replenished, animals were corralled, and longhouses were reinforced. The knowledge accumulated over months of growth and labor was tested anew. Yet even in the darkest months, life persisted. Children continued to learn, artisans crafted tools, and communities supported one another. Survival had become a culture, an identity shaped by cycles of scarcity and abundance, challenge and triumph. It was a culture in which food, shelter, and health were inseparable, each element reinforcing the others in a continuous loop of preparation, action, and recovery. Ultimately, the Viking mastery of survival reflects the broader human story. It is a story of observation, adaptation, and ingenuity, of communities learning to live in harmony with a demanding environment. The harshness of Scandinavia shaped not only their daily routines but their social structures, economic strategies, and even their mythology. Every longhouse, every grain store, every preserved fish, and every journey across ice or sea was part of a larger system of knowledge and skill, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The legacy of the Vikings is visible not only in sagas and archaeological remains, but in the enduring lessons of practical wisdom and adaptation. They teach us how humans can respond to extreme conditions with creativity, cooperation, and discipline. Their strategies for food, shelter, and health were not isolated practices. They were integrated systems developed over generations, refined through experience, and tested by nature's relentless challenges. It is a story of survival, yes, but also of mastery. Mastery of the land, of resources, and of the human capacity to endure. Through centuries, the Vikings' example endures as a reminder that survival is not merely about enduring adversity. It is about understanding it, adapting to it, and ultimately thriving within it. They transformed the challenges of a ruthless climate into a structured, sustainable way of life, demonstrating that human ingenuity, foresight, and community can overcome even the most formidable natural obstacles. In this, the Vikings were not simply warriors or explorers. They were architects of survival, designing lives that could withstand storms, famine, and frost, leaving behind lessons that resonate far beyond their icy homelands.